I think one of the functions of strategy can be well summed up by what Michael Porter, Harvard Business School professor, said. For something to have meaning, it needs defined endpoints. A tree is not a cat. Let's move to the retailer. So let's say their vision is to be the default place customers go when an urgent, unexpected household need arises. And when making a decision, he'd say, does this make the aeroplane go faster? So to completely change tack is ill-advised, as you'd be effectively wiping the memories, promises, and associations and starting again. Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the Push podcast. My name's Jack Ferguson, an experienced brand strategist with a science background. In my career, I've worked across 25 industries and helped increase client and employer revenue by over $40 million. I will be your host. This season of the podcast is essential listening for marketers looking to better sell their strategies to stakeholders, get client buy-in, and keep internal teams engaged. Thanks for being here, and don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 68 of the Push podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about the ontology of brand. This is part 2 of a 3-part series where I'm going to be talking about brand strategy in particular and doing quite a bit of scenario modeling with each strategy output. So in the last episode, I spoke about the commercial implications of brand and tied brand concepts back to revenue because brand, the term, as we know, can be quite fluffy. I tried to bring more rigor to the term. I provided a definition of what I believe a brand to be, which is a brand is what's perceived and remembered about an entity, shaping when it's recognized, recalled, or ignored, and how people behave in relation to it. I believe that brand is a function of memory, and the different types of memory that I spoke about on the last episode were sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. And I also spoke about brand diagnostics on the last episode. So that's internal and market diagnostics, effectively the blood test of any brand development, decision architecture, brand asset development process. But this episode is going to be more focused on brand strategy, what it is, how you use it, and how you know if something is strategic or not. In part 3 of this 3-part series, I'll be talking more about the tactical end of the spectrum, so brand assets, brand plans, some of the neuroscience around the senses, asset hierarchy, and operational realities as well. But this episode's about brand strategy, so let's get into that. I'm going to assume that your brand diagnostics are done, or you know what I mean by brand diagnostics. If not, maybe go back and listen to the previous episode first, because I'm not sure if parts of this episode won't make sense if you haven't listened to it. The scenario modeling I'll do in this episode is through the eyes of an accounting firm for the B2B side, and I'll do it also through the eyes of a retail chain for the B2C side. I tried to use these examples so they're accessible for everyone and that they can make sense to all of us. So let's get into it though. So like brand, I think strategy is a weird word. It can be very slippery in its definition, but for me, it does transcend any tactical application. It's the what, not the how. So how would I know if something is strategic or tactical? A quick test for that for me is that anything strategic shouldn't depend on more context or information. The brand strategy should be the context. So for example, a brand position is an output of a brand strategy or part of a brand strategy. If someone said, what's your brand position? The answer would never be, it depends, therefore it is strategic. If, on the other hand, someone said, how do I get a t-shirt designed for an event we are running? That would depend. What's the event? What are the goals for the event? That would dictate what copy was used, how much copy was used. And while it can't violate the brand position, there would be a contextual aspect to this decision. You'd need more information. So I would consider that tactical. I think one of the functions of strategy can be well summed up by what Michael Porter, Harvard Business School professor, said, and that is that the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. So strategy being very much something that takes care of 1,000 decisions beyond itself. Most of those decisions are going to be no. Because it's easy to keep adding to-dos in a business and more things to do. The real discipline is in what we say no to. And that's what strategy is very useful for. So let's get into the outputs that I would produce as part of a brand strategy. Not all of them are relevant in every case, but I'm going to go through them and talk about what they are and how I'd use them in relation to the accounting firm and in relation to the retailer. Some of them are more driven by internal diagnostics, and some of them are more driven by market diagnostics. I'll explain that as I go. The reason for that is that there are parts of a brand that are foundational and can't be violated and will be long-term, and there are parts of a brand that can evolve. And I think a good metaphor for that is who we are as people or who you are as a person. I'm sure there are still values and goals and dreams that you've had your whole life that haven't changed. Some you may have realized, some that you're still working on, but I'm sure there are parts of you as well that have evolved. You probably don't spend your time the way you did 10 years ago, or behave exactly the same way you did 10 years ago, or make exactly the same decisions you made 10 years ago, as an example. So there's a part that evolves, and some of that evolution may be dependent on what has happened around you. Same thing for a brand. There's a part that evolves and listens to what's happening around, and there's a part that stays the same and is effectively DNA and doesn't change. If everything changed, there's no sovereignty, there's no identity. For something to have meaning, it needs defined endpoints. A tree is not a cat, is a good sentence I like to say here. If a brand was completely malleable, it does lose meaning. There needs to be parts that do stay the same. But if everything was completely rigid, we'd miss out on evolving with the market and the times to better suit the current world and better fit into the current world. Just like how a marketer might now start to embrace AI. There's a part of them that's evolving, but there are still defined endpoints that mean they are still a marketer. Anyway, onto the outputs that are driven from a brand strategy. I'll start with those that are more driven from the internal diagnostics first. And the first two I'll speak about are a brand vision and a brand mission. So a brand vision being an aspirational statement that defines a long-term future you want to create. It acts as your internal North Star, and it sets a clear destination that informs strategic choices and inspires the team. So that's the vision. Your brand mission is a clear, action-oriented statement that explains how you achieve your brand vision. It's a high-level roadmap that translates aspiration into action. So I'll touch on here that sometimes talent acquisition can actually be forgotten when it comes to the value of a brand. And part of a brand strategy is actually really important for that and inspiring the internal team and acting as something that attracts the right team. So a brand vision, a brand mission in most cases are more internal documents to me. The brand vision tends to be more aspirational and less tangible in nature, but more likely to attract aligned team members if it is embodied. And it does help with large, uncertain decisions like perhaps capability building or business model adaptation or business merging, acquisition, that type of thing. The brand mission tends to be more operational and it's more likely to be used in day-to-day or week-to-week decisions. So I'll talk about a couple of examples of both now. So let's go to the accounting firm. And let's say that their brand vision is to transform accounting into decision infrastructure that enables better, faster capital allocation. Now, let's say they're faced with a decision. Do they start a bookkeeping arm to their business, or do they build data science capability? If you consult your vision, you would prioritize building the data science capability because it directly strengthens the brand's role as decision infrastructure. Bookkeeping would be more of a supporting layer. So the vision can be helpful when a decision like this is in front of us. On the surface, maybe doing both sounds okay, but if a decision needs to be made, if it is one or the other, then the vision can help with that. Let's move to the retailer. So let's say their vision is to be the default place customers go when an urgent, unexpected household need arises. Now let's look at a scenario. So if this retailer was faced with the decision of expanding into furniture, so couches and dining tables, or not, if you consulted the vision, the answer would be no, because furniture purchasing is likely to be more planned unless people start breaking furniture and needing it at the last minute for some reason. But the vision would help answer that question and would help the company or the brand say no. With a vision like this, you'd probably also need longer business hours, and any idea to restrict access or business hours would likely violate the vision. All right, let's try some mission statements now. So for the accounting firm, let's say their brand mission is, we deliver decision-ready insight at speed by integrating accounting, forecasting, and scenario modeling through technology. We prioritize timeliness over completeness so clients can allocate capital quickly and effectively. So a scenario they may be faced with is, do we produce more highly detailed, perfectly reconciled monthly reports for our clients? Or do we release a faster, slightly less complete weekly dashboard with forecasts for our clients? Here you'd obviously go for option number 2. That's where the mission would help make this decision. You're prioritizing speed. Monthly reports would be too slow. Let's go back to the retailer now. So let's say their brand mission is we facilitate fast, reliable fixes for urgent household needs by ensuring essential products are consistently in stock, easy to find, and effortless to purchase. So that's the mission. Now let's say they're faced with a scenario. And let's say they're faced with a decision of either adding 12 new SKUs of air fresheners, which do have a higher margin, I may add. But at the same time, their data is showing them, their store data is showing them that out of stocks on batteries, light bulbs, and drain cleaner are happening frequently during peak periods. If you consulted the mission, you would put your resources into fixing the problem of batteries, light bulbs, and drain cleaner being out of stock rather than adding SKUs of air fresheners that are unlikely to be emergency based or unlikely to be a last minute need. There are some famous examples of brand missions making decisions easier. So one of those examples is Kelly Johnson, the aerospace engineer from Skunkworks. And when making a decision, he'd say, does this make the aeroplane go faster? That brand's mission or Skunkworks' brand mission may have been, we design aircraft to maximize speed and performance above all else. Jim Senegal from Costco would ask, does this lower price for members? The brand mission of Costco may be, we deliver the lowest possible prices to our members through disciplined cost control and operational efficiency. Warren Buffett would say, will this compound capital over decades? The implied brand mission here is something along the lines of, we allocate capital into high-quality businesses to maximize long-term compounding returns. So there are some examples of brand missions, brand visions, and how they can be applied. The vision and mission are more based upon internal diagnostics because a brand will often go through a refresh, say, every 5 to 10 years, sometimes sooner if they are a newer brand. And all the decisions that are being made during that time, according to this brand vision and mission, will set expectations with the market over that period of time. So memories and associations with the brand are built. So to completely change tack is ill-advised, as you'd be effectively wiping the memories, promises, and associations and starting again. Remembering that almost all of our processing, our mental processing, is unconscious. So if all of a sudden the retailer restricted business hours in a big way, or the accounting firm started optimizing for accuracy over speed, people may turn off the brand, even if the brand's only made implicit promises as opposed to explicit ones. But if they have followed the brand vision and mission, they're likely to have made a lot of implicit promises, at least during that time. I don't generally advise to use the brand vision and brand mission in comms unless an explicit promise is required, or you're putting it out there for talent acquisition purposes and you want people to know that this is the vision and mission. Occasionally, it can be useful to say it to the market, but more times it's not. It's more an internal document most of the time. And I generally recommend against refreshing a vision or mission unless it was really poorly executed. So vision and mission are two outputs that are likely to transcend brand refreshes and market changes. So it's best to base this more on brand DNA than on market diagnostics. So we'll move on to the next two outputs now. So one being brand philosophy and the other being brand narrative. The diagnostics I'd use here still skew towards the internal diagnostics over the market diagnostics, but they're not as far skewed as the vision and mission are. They're a little bit more malleable over time and can often be partially, at least, updated as part of a brand refresh. So a lot of these decisions I make or advise on have the next brand refresh in mind. Like that's what we're usually trying to get to when we're creating a brand strategy. But let's talk about these outputs. So brand philosophy, this is your brand philosophy defines the values, beliefs, and principles your brand will consistently uphold. It's the behavioral framework for how you act, speak, and make day-to-day decisions. So as I said, vision and mission don't usually make it down to comms decisions. Brand philosophy can and often does, but it's also great for hiring. So does the person you're hiring or the supplier you're thinking about working with share these beliefs and values? Do they share your philosophy? The more aligned, the less assumptions and the less friction, generally the more profit. Now, usually a brand philosophy that I create has about 6 to 12 assertions in it. You don't want too many because it becomes unpractical, but you don't want too little for it not to be comprehensive. And for the sake of brevity, I am going to only list 3 assertions per brand because I think it's going to be too hard to list out 10 per brand as an example. But normally I would have more assertions than this. So let's look at the philosophy through the accounting firm. They could have, number 1, most problems show up in the numbers last. By the time an issue appears in financials, it's usually been building elsewhere in the business. Number 2, clients rarely say what they actually need. What a client asks for is often a proxy for a deeper concern they haven't articulated. Number 3, the quality of a decision determines the quality of the answer. Better inputs matter more than better outputs. So there's 3 there. Most problems show up in the numbers last, number 1. 2, clients rarely say what they actually need. 3, the quality of a question determines the quality of the answer. So let's use a scenario here. Let's say a client comes to this accounting firm and they say, our margins are down. Can you do a full cost analysis and tell us where we're overspending? What would you ideally do? You'd delay the cost analysis because according to point number 2, clients rarely say what they actually need, and you'd investigate instead and look for the need behind the ask, because you've also said that most problems show up in the numbers last. As part of this investigation, you would ask questions. So the quality of a question determines the quality of the answer. You may find something like margins have dropped due to aggressive discounting and costs aren't actually the problem. It would be on brand for this accounting firm to figure that out. Now, as for the retailer, 3 assertions could be, number 1, customers don't read stores, they scan them. Number 2, what customers complain about is often not the real problem. Number 3, consistency builds trust faster than improvement. So let's say a customer comes to this retailer and says, or there's a lot of customers coming to this retailer and saying, it feels harder to shop on your website now. What do you do? So of course the customer hasn't told you that you implemented behavior-based product placement and dynamic category ordering, and now it takes me too long and I'm too confused. They don't say that. They just say it's too hard to shop on the website. Now, some people in the company might want to add more prompts and more helpful, quote-unquote, UI elements, but this would violate the philosophy. So you wouldn't redesign the UI. Instead, you'd restore the consistent navigation you had before and you'd standardize the layout across sessions. So without this philosophy, the retailer may respond to the complaint literally, and they may make the problem worse by making more changes and there being now more inconsistency because there's more changes. With the philosophy, you treat the complaint as a symptom, not a solution. So that's brand philosophy. Now, let's look at brand narrative, the next output. So to me, your brand narrative hosts key storytelling elements that you repeatedly return to. It serves as a foundational brief for all external communications. It informs promotional messages, website copy, social media content, and advertising campaigns. Designers, copywriters, and other creatives can use your brand narrative for storytelling direction. Now, this is where people can think that this is like a story. I've heard people call this like a brand story before, and that it's used in comms. And this is not what that is. This is a strategic document that internal and external comms can use so that plot points are continuously hit over time. And guardrails for the substance of that comms is defined. So you need a brand narrative because without it, you actually don't know what you can and can't say. And a great litmus test for a brand narrative is, if I gave this to a creative, would they know the boundaries between what campaign concepts would be on brand versus off brand? If you're McDonald's, you'd probably include Ronald McDonald in your narrative. If you're Bundaberg Rum, you'd probably use the Polar Bear in your narrative. If you were Budweiser, you'd probably use the Clydesdales in your narrative. So I'm going to go on a quick tangent here. Creative over time for a brand can be changed too often because the company gets bored of it, but the market hasn't. Or people are trying to look like they're needed in a company or as a supplier, whether that is an internal marketer or that is a external agency doing creative work. They may say, we need to keep doing new campaigns and making changes, but often that's not ideal. Remember, we're building memories here. Consistency helps with that. Good creative has a much longer shelf life than what it is often thought to be. And I can point to a piece of creative from RSPCA. Their Animal Walk campaign has been used at least to some extent for about 40 years now. And I'll link to that in the description. But if you are in Australia, you are highly likely to have seen this advertisement. I'm going to go off script here a bit because it's going to be too hard for me to create a brand narrative for both the accounting firm and the retailer. So instead, I'm just going to use Budweiser as an example, and I'm going to give you an example of what a brand narrative may sound like or look like. And I'm also going to talk about two pieces of creative that they have put out there. One that I thought was not appropriate according to the brand narrative I'm going to share with you. Now, bear in mind, I don't have access to Budweiser's actual brand narrative, but it had a lot of problems with it. And I'm going to point you to a creative that was very appropriate, in my opinion. So a simplified version of their narrative may sound something like, an immigrant brewer builds a beer to taste the same every time, and as it spreads across working-class America, teams of 8 massive Clydesdales horses in polished brass harness pull a red wagon through main streets, hooves striking the pavement in unison. The delivery becomes a spectacle, the weight of the hitch, the sound of the chains and leather, the deliberate pace, the precision, something people gather around, photograph, remember, repeated at parades, state fairs, and the Super Bowl year after year. As everything else changes, these same elements keep returning. The Clydesdales, the beer wagon, the harnesses, the brass fittings, and the ritual of serving. Reminding everyone this is the same beer done the same way every time. So again, this is strategic. You wouldn't put this out there in comms. Instead, you'd use it to inform comms. So there's visual aspects that the narrative talks about. The Clydesdales, the red wagon. There's sounds that could be used. The hooves, the harness, working class American music. There's the ritualistic aspect to it. American traditions, Super Bowl, fairs, parades. And this is where brand heritage comes to the party. What are those micro memories and assets that have been implanted over time that we need to continue to return to? So for the sake of these two examples, I want you to assume that what I've said there is Budweiser's brand narrative, and I got it right. So Budweiser released an ad in 2005. Again, I'll link to that in the description, with Jay-Z. If you don't know who Jay-Z is, he is an enormous star, one of the biggest stars in the world. I watched this ad and I have no idea how anyone could think it was Budweiser. It was a massive failure, and basically in the ad, people are ballet dancing and playing hip-hop music. The music was so far removed. There's no Clydesdales, there's no red wagon, there's no hat tip to the brewing process, there's no hooves hitting the pavement, there's no harness swinging around. It's just focused on hip-hop and ballet dancing. It's just really bizarre. And Jay-Z is far from working class. Again, I'll link to it in the description and you'll see what I mean. If we compare that to a campaign they ran in 2013 during the Super Bowl, I'll link to this as well, but they've brought in the Clydesdales straight away. There's more country music used. They've captured the brewing process more. There was a parade. There was more Budweiser imagery all through the ad. You actually know it's Budweiser. And it is just far superior, in my opinion. So those are two examples. I'll link to them in the description for you. So that's brand narrative. Now, the last 4 outputs I will talk about now, 1 being target audience, 2 being brand position, 3 being a unique value proposition, and 4 being a company position. So these outputs are a little bit more dependent on market diagnostics. They're more up that end of the spectrum. They're more likely to be more malleable as the market changes and during brand refreshes. So these parts of the brand strategy can change quite a bit during a brand refresh. So you probably know what a target market is, but a brand position is the associations that you have that are superior to the alternatives and the points of parity you have with the alternatives. Now, by points of parity, I use a restaurant example most of the time. So if a restaurant's clean, that's a point of parity. It's not really a differentiator. It's not really a point of superiority. That's what I mean by a point of parity. You have to have it, but it's not going to differentiate you. A unique value proposition, to me, is a combination of the brand points of difference. And a company position is a descriptor of what your brand is known to do. So I'll go through all this with examples. So with the accounting firm and the retailer. So let's say that the target audience for the accounting firm could be mid-sized business owners and CFOs who are making frequent capital allocation decisions. So let's say that the brand position, the points of difference come out as more decisive, faster, and more futuristic. So you'd be more decisive, faster, and more futuristic than your competitors. The points of parity could be accurate, credible, compliant. things you have to do, but you're not going to differentiate yourself on these. So now your unique value proposition would have to encompass the combination of the points of difference and ideally back this up or support those points of difference with structural advantages that will make it hard for someone else to do what you're doing. So as much as possible, it's better to do what your competitors can't, not what they won't or aren't currently doing. I'll also note here it's very difficult to be superior to every competitor in every way, and that's why there's a combination of factors at play here. Maybe some competitors are equal or even better than you are at one or more of these associations, but not all of them at once. That's why there's multiple. So let's say one of the structural advantages for this accounting firm would be that the business model was built structurally without billable hour reporting. Let's say the incentives that are deeply embedded in this brand are that performance is measured on whether insight is delivered in time to influence decisions, not on billable hours. Let's say the technological aspect is there's a structural advantage because technology for this accounting firm is the primary production layer, whereas traditional firms layered tools on top of the labor-driven workflows. This brand was built on technology from day one. Let's say there's a cultural structural advantage because the firm was built from day one with norms, incentives, hiring, training that all align to timely decision useful action under uncertainty with a futuristic focus. So traditional firms may be built around more completeness and risk minimization, making cultural change for those firms almost impossible probably. And it wouldn't be their core competence. It's not what they've been built on. So if someone was to try and compete with this brand, they'd have to have a pricing model that's not billable hours. Their workflow design would have to avoid any sort of periodic reporting. Their capability mix would have to be technology plus labor. They'd have to move their culture away from perfection or compliance first, and that conflicts with how a lot of traditional firms are structured and monetized. So that's a UVP. Company position in this case for the accounting firm would be accounting firm. So company positions become a problem when someone thinks you're not what you are. So if someone was running this accounting firm and a lot of people thought they were a law firm, that would be a problem. That would be a problem with company position. So let's move to the retailer now. So let's say their target market is adults living in cities who are impatient, pragmatic, time poor, and self-reliant. Now, their brand position, the points of difference maybe they're more immediate, they're more certain, they're less effort, and they're more accessible. Let's say a point of parity is that they're affordable. So as part of their UVP, let's say this model is structurally advantaged by concentrating focus into high-frequency, high-urgency use cases. They're focused on the depth of essential items, which increases stock reliability, and they're better at delivering that than in other broad range retail models. So let's say their incentives, there's structural advantage at the incentive level because they've aligned performance with speed and successful problem resolution, and they're not chasing basket-sized, well-timed range expansion, that type of thing. Let's say that they're structurally advantaged from a technological point of view because they've been built from the ground up to forecast demand for essential items, maintain availability, and support that rapid navigation and checkout process. And let's say their culture is structurally advantaged because they've been established from day one around consistency, clarity, and speed under pressure. So for competitors, they may have to reduce their SKU range to compete with this model, reallocate capital away from variety, standardize their store environments more, shift incentives away from basket growth and margin expansion. And a lot of these changes conflict with how most retailers are historically built. A lot of their revenue models depend on range breadth and in-store engagement. So that's an example of where the retailer could have a UVP and how there could be structural advantages in place to maintain that UVP. For the company position for this retailer, let's say it's a convenience store that is always open. That's what they want people to think about their brand as. So those are the outputs for brand strategy. Thank you for listening in to part 2 of the Ontology of Brand. I do appreciate it. Part 3 will be the next episode that's out, and that will be about brand assets, plans, asset hierarchy, multi-sensory neuroscience, the operational realities, and the more tactical end of the brand development process. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Push Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, and if you are enjoying the episodes, please leave a review of the podcast on your platform of choice. It really helps to build the podcast credibility and to help others find this type of information.